Hello and welcome back. In this episode of the David Watson podcast, I spoke to Angie, and I even said to Angie afterwards, I wasn't sure how the podcast was going to go because it's about the history of Canada, the Indigenous people, and it's just not something I know much about. And I will 100%, and I even say it in the podcast, at times I'm speechless. I just completely caught off guard. I did not know the history of Canada by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but I really enjoyed speaking to Angie, and I hope you enjoy listening. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for joining me, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And I just pre-starting, we've had a lovely little chat about our dogs, and although we love them, we know that they're killers. And
I don't know what that says about us as humans.
It's I think we're very much like dogs. We all come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, and moods, and you know, some things we try to hump, some things we try to eat, and other times we're sleeping. So we're all very we're similar in that way. We're going to talk about. Actually, can you tell us what we're going to talk about? Because it's an area that I know very little of, outside of common fiction.
So I'm a historian. I got my start in university at the University of Chichester in West Sussex. And so I was a high school dropout, and there's all these different sort of, I don't want to punch down on it, but there is some discrimination against Indigenous people in North America. So I struggled to get into university. And so I started looking, where could I apply outside? And I had to choose an English speaking country because that's my first language. And so I just randomly applied to that small art school, and I got in.
Oh, wow.
So I obtained degrees in England in history, creative writing, and English literature. And it was such an extraordinary opportunity. And to kind of, being the only Indigenous person gave me this profound new perspective. And this is I'm fresh out of high school at this point. I'm 18, 19. And it sort of broadens my horizon. And so I'm trained as a historian. And Canada, I don't know if you're familiar with the residential schools. I belong to the Relocation Nation, which is in the Northwest Territory. So that's in the subarctic tundra.
Okay.
And so I don't know how familiar.
I'm not familiar with Canada at all because Canada's huge.
Yeah. So in Canada and the United States, as we kind of switch from being under British rule and they go to their kind of autonomous and they become the nation states, under federal law in both those countries, they want to suppress the Indigenous peoples for a whole variety of reasons. So in the mid-1800s, they switched to a policy of annihilate, assimilate, or exterminate. And so they start moving Indigenous people to reservations. So they designate, okay, this is your land now, we're taking the rest. And then they take it one step further and they start removing the children and placing them in government-run schools where they're receiving education that isn't on par with the rest of, the population's getting. And there's all these varieties of horrors going on there. So these schools run for over 100 years. And so in Canada, I think the last school closed in 1994 or 1996. And so my mother attended residential school. So they forcibly took her from her home. They disconnect you from your culture. And here they're abusing these children in a variety of ways. They're medically experimenting on them. And the whole reason is to break that cultural bond, to kind of assimilate them into God knows what. So my mother goes through that. She ends up kind of, transcending that and becoming an Air Force pilot. And she unintentionally gets pregnant with me, my brothers, and my one other sister. And the government forcibly takes me and one of my brothers away from her at birth. So then they started doing this because they were shutting down the residential schools. And so they could no longer take the Indigenous children and place them in these boarding schools. They start taking them and placing them in non-Indigenous households for the same purpose of assimilate and annihilate. So, I had a lot of sadness growing up. It was not necessarily a healthy, loving environment. And so I had to really like piece together to get to where I am. And so like I was very upset adolescent. And it arose, sort of trauma arose and all sorts of dysfunction. But the core of it, I just kept on asking why. I'm like,
Yeah.
why is this going on? Why is this happening to us? Why is this still happening to us? And so this led me on the path of higher education.
What just for reference, so I don't know how many people are kind of familiar with the atrocities of humans in general. Do you know what I mean? You can pick a continent, you can pick a country, and whoever invaded did some atrocious things. But one of the things that I've always, and this is, I'm good if you let me finish, because I don't want to.
Oh, for sure.
I don't want to sort of kind of become disrespectful. One of the things I always say to people is, you can't judge people by today's standards, right? Because it was a different world. But and this is where I say I don't know about this history at all. I know nothing about it. You're talking about recently.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're not in like antiquity. We're in like the
this is what I'm
present
saying.
now.
Yeah. Yes. So
And
what
so
what
nobody
sort of
likes
decades
to.
are we talking about? Because did you say like the 90s?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm talking like 70s, 80s, 90s. So like I was forcibly taken from my mother in 1983. And so, there's these big civil rights movements that are kind of like sprouting up in the United States and Canada, and the Indians and the African Americans are sort of banding together. So I kind of start unpacking this in this novel. But what I have learned, because I've traveled the world and I've lived around the world, and upon, my arrival in England, is, like you mentioned, like these atrocities are happening globally.
Yeah.
It's not limited to the indigenous people. Like it's happened in England, it's happened in Scotland, it's happened in Ireland, it's
Mm.
happened in France. Like you start like traveling around, you're like, whoa, like
Yeah.
eyes
Yeah.
wide open.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I don't think people realize, like, one of the ones I always reference is in Europe. There was a thing called the 100-Year War, which was, I think it was actually
Oh
about
yeah.
109 years or something. And people are like, what? I say, oh yeah, the whole of Europe for over a century was at war with each other. We were never. Peace has. I'm trying to think. In Europe, if you exclude what's currently going on in Ukraine with Russia, because that'd be East Europe, it's not traditionally what we call Europe. We've only had peace since the Second World War.
And
But
it's been a delicate piece. We all
well,
remember East
that's
Germany and
only
West Germany.
well. This is, and I was going to mention that, and I was also going to say, but then you have Spain, because they had their own civil wars right up until the 70s. Then you had, because that was under a dictator in Franco.
Yeah, fascist dictator.
Yeah, and then Portugal was the same. Then there's the disputed territories between northern Spain and France, the Basque region. And there's lots of little principalities, or, kind of, I'm not sure the term the Spanish use, but dispute their independence, Catalonia being one. They recently had riots, and, you could technically declare that as a civil war, as some of their MPs, members of parliament, had to flee Catalonia and take refuge in Andorra because the Spanish government were going to arrest them. And that wasn't that. It was only pre-lockdown, so.
For sure. Like something that made a lasting impression on me when I was studying European history was the Picasso painting Guernica. Kind of depicting like, that they were bombed by, Germany. And you're like, kind of, there's a lot of components of history that are kind of just like, no one takes the time to write about it, or you can't get the funding to like
Yeah.
research that. So that really intrigued me as a human. So I started kind of going into like this fringe history. So I start in the UK, and then I end up back in Canada, still pursuing higher academia. And so I'm kind of picking up on, I'm coming in with a different perspective, and I'm picking up on things that, kind of no one's looked at, because the Indigenous history is like Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
Like it's so complex and nuanced. There's no, oh, they were bad and they were good. Like it's very, very gray. There's all sorts of interracial mixing between, Black Americans, white Americans, and Indigenous Americans. Like it's not this like pure, the different nations, like Indigenous nations in North America don't necessarily get along. They're so culturally different. It's like comparing Germans to Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So there's, yeah, and so, some of them allied with the American military are working on scouts and they're trying to, suppress these other Indigenous nations to get them onto the reservation. So it's this very, and then you have American military that's sticking up for the Indians and they're getting court-martialed and, everyone's dying. Like it's very complex. And so I start looking at this and no one's really written about it. I was like, wow, like I need to make this accessible. So when I was in England, I had the opportunity to train under Professor Keith Jenkins. So we studied like history through a postmodern lens, and we're going through all these like different philosophical teachings. You get into some, reading by like Ortega y Gasset and these different philosophers, and only maybe 1,000 people will ever read them. So I didn't want to just become a professor where my knowledge is sort of limited to the select few that can make it that far. So I'm a mother, so I wanted to make the history like engaging and accessible and to offer like a different perspective that isn't out there. And because I do come from that, that trauma, I am recently impacted by these historical policies. Like, it's like, well, let's talk about this because this is still happening. And for me, that was very healing.
Yeah, no, it's very strange. It is the closest I can kind of come to any insight is I'm half Irish. My mum is Irish and was born in Southern Ireland, and my dad is English and was a British soldier. And
there's complexity in that.
There is. Well, it gets even more complex because my mum's mum and my mum's dad both served for the British Army in World War II. My nan's sister, my mum's aunt, her husband fought for the IRA against the British.
So like who's right and who's wrong, right?
Do you know what? From my understanding, because I never spoke to Great Uncle Peter about it, but largely because I was too young, and my granddad died when I was about 7. So I never, although I knew him, I never was old enough to have a conversation with him about the war. I was never old enough to really ever ask Great Uncle Peter, about his time in the IRA. And my understanding from both sides is no good comes from talking of the past. And from what and from what my
as a historian, that goes against my whole theological view of the world.
From what I understand with my great uncle Peter, and I'd never be disrespectful to ever ask anybody kind of directly. My understanding is that as far as from his perspective, the war was lost, the treaty was signed. If we are going to find peace, we have to move on. But it was never about forgetting what has happened and why we were fighting. It's at some point we have to stop killing each other, and we lost the war. And from my granddad's perspective, I think because he fought in Korea in World War II and he fought all over, I think I've killed enough people that it's time to stop.
I feel the same way. Like we have to move forward as a community, not like, oh, okay, this is mine and this is yours. Yeah. Like at this point, like,
but like I said, I do have to clarify. I was never old enough to have a conversation with them about it, so I'm giving an interpretation to what I have been told. But they were both like, no, you live in the future. And we're not gonna. And I honestly think it's just because both of them had seen so many people die.
They had like witnessed enough atrocity to.
Yeah.
Like when you so unpacking these different policies because they're still impacting Indigenous people in North America today. So we have some of the highest rates of Indigenous women going missing and murdered out of like any demographic. We have the highest rates of substance abuse. We have the highest rates of suicide. We have the highest rates of incarceration. We make up like less than like 2% of like the population. So we have forcible sterilization and euthanasia going on. Like there's just, we're not at a place where, these policies aren't still kind of there. And so for me, it's like, well, we should probably have a look on where they're stemming from, because we get so caught up in, the rage of it that we're not able to look at the historical trajectory and see that nuance.
Yeah. But it is, how do you, when the policies are so recent and you're directly affected, which you are, how do you separate the unfairness?
I don't think it's separating it. I think it's acknowledging it. And like, if we don't talk about it, we can't acknowledge it. So it's, it's sort of like one of my daughters is scared of the dark, even though she's a teenager. Yeah. And it's like, if you turn on the light, it's totally fine. So it's sort of, it's illuminating that dark past and being like, well, there is a tremendous amount of Indigenous agency. There is a tremendous amount of, step forward. And we still have some work to do, but we need to support each other. There's a strange sort of racial divide where it's like, well, no, like you can't do that. Like I don't want to punch down on people, but there's like this slogan, like land back. It's like, well, whose land at this point? Like we're 500 years into it. Like I think at this point it's ours. And so, it's, you can't like that sort of comes from like a place of control as well, right? It's like this like othering, whereas like, I fully participate in, Western culture.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too. So like as a historian, you start kind of studying it, and they took down really complex civilizations. So when, we had European, explorers, we'll call them, land in North America, like these were complex, like organized cities, with multi-story buildings, hierarchical, like, there's like really advanced spirituality. There was written language, like they had irrigation, they did crops. So, when we kind of, a lot of people, they think of Indigenous, they kind of think of this weird, like late 1800s version where they're kind of like all like roaming the plains.
Yeah, that's when you said to me, like,
and they have dark hair and dark eyes, and they're kind of dirty, and that's actually not how it was at all. Like if you start going into the ethnographic photographs, like you can see like there's blonde hair and blue eyes, like there's a whole, like it depends on like where you are. Like if you go more eastern, like they're lighter. If you go kind of more towards the west coast here, they're like shorter and darker. Like where I'm from, like people are quite tall, and some of them have green eyes. Like it's
I think if you asked the majority of people in the UK about the Indigenous Indians in Canada, they wouldn't know that there was any.
Yeah. And that's why I do what I do.
but honestly, do you know what I mean? That they would be like, no, it was in the USA, because until I get opportunities to speak to people like yourself, I could not tell you what the history of Canada is or was until I talked to somebody like yourself. It'd be like, oh, hang on a second, yeah, but what was Canada doing? Because it was around as long as, you know what I mean? It's not like it just suddenly popped up. Somebody
Canada
just like
puts on a friendly face, the government, but they're into some real wacky business.
Yeah.
It's very underhanded. It's like that sneaky kid that, gets away with murder because they're able to like hide it and like kind of blame it on that person. They're like, oh, look at the US.
Yeah, but it's
not us.
Yeah, because this is the thing. I would, if you would have asked me pre-booking, like genuinely, this is how unknown all of this is to me, and I have no idea what sort of conversation I'm getting into, because I've zero knowledge of Canadian history outside of effectively it eventually got split up between the Brits and the French. And that's a really bad stereotype of their history.
Yeah, we have poor Quebec. Like no one speaks French outside of like Quebec. Like they speak a little bit in like Ontario, Manitoba, and then kind of like dwindles off. You get to where I am in British Columbia, and it's like, nope. And so every once in a while, right, they try to separate, and then that like calms down.
Yeah, and this is what I mean. If you ask people, most people I'd have thought in Britain, who have never been to Canada, like myself, we would be able to tell you, yep, Canada's big. Most people speak English, and there's a French part. But until I seen this, I had no idea that there was an indigenous population of tribes.
Yeah, there's like where I'm from, it's 50% Indigenous in the Northwest Territories, and if you get into like Saskatchewan, it's the same thing, and Manitoba, like we're the fastest growing demographic. So like we don't seem to have like any issues having children, which you can see that infertility is a problem among some groups. It's we can, and we have like it's welcome, even though like the dysfunction, like children like are very like family, like despite everything is like super big in our communities.
Yeah.
And you bring your kids everywhere. like I don't hesitate to like take my kids places. Like to me that's normal. It's like, oh, of course you're coming. Like let's go.
Yeah.
You get into like we traveled through Europe a few years ago, and we were in Greece, and we went to this really nice restaurant. So it was me with them, and that overlooked the Acropolis. And
nice.
like it didn't occur to me that I shouldn't bring them. So we showed up, and they were like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Well, if you want us to leave, we'll leave, but like they're good."
Yeah. Yeah, there are.
Yeah. So as a historian, so I met up with an archaeologist in Athens, and we kind of started going through, the different historical sites, and we're studying the things. And what I found interesting is in the 1920s, the Smithsonian came in and started taking objects. And so that's a big problem in North America as well. So around the same time, they're coming into all these indigenous communities, and they're taking stuff. They're taking buried people, they're taking all these objects, and they're hoarding them someplace. And so, me and the Greek archaeologist, were like, well, why? Like, and so now you only have, you're only working with like 25% of like the visible history. So I'm sure they did that in England as well.
Yeah.
You get to Stonehenge, like I'm sure they like got in there and took a few things.
Well, Stonehenge is about 30-minute walk from my house.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you just go through there and you're like, oh yeah, like you get like
I went to Stonehenge Secondary School.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So, and the funny thing is I say to people, like, Stonehenge isn't even that impressive. There's much more. There are better things around Stonehenge that are more impressive than Stonehenge.
What would be the number one thing that you would go to where you are instead of Stonehenge?
I would take you about 30 minutes north of Stonehenge and take you to Avebury. And it's a massive circle of stones that they let you walk around. It actually has a village inside it and a pub and everything like that. And if you wanted to walk around it, it'd take you about an hour to an hour and a half.
Wow.
And the stones are bigger. It's as old as Stonehenge. But just slightly north, like a 10-minute walk north of Stonehenge is Durrington Walls, which was the settlement that existed before Stonehenge was built. To the right of Stonehenge is something called a Ceres Circle that predates Stonehenge by about 1,000 years. But it was ploughed up over centuries, and you can't see it very well.
And so that was pre-Roman invasion.
Yeah, well, it's pre-Stonehenge, the Ceres Circle.
Yeah, totally. So where I was in Chichester, it was one of the first places the Romans landed. So and so you kind of had this overlay on your history, right? Because you underwent the same process that the indigenous people of North America went, but with the Romans.
And the Saxons and the Vikings.
Right? Yeah. So like what we're talking about, like this like colonial blueprint, it's not new. It's just like I'm living proof of like, I think like we have to look at the humanity of it, and like in a lot of ways, I wouldn't say anywhere is perfect right now. Like we're dealing with some really challenging
I think one of the
social
things,
issues.
yeah, I think one of the things that is very difficult is if you look at any country, it has a history of being invaded or invading. You know, people, colonial history is huge, but people don't know much about Spanish history, and like most people don't know that the Crusades meant that for a period of time, I think right up to Portugal was Muslim because the Christians lost ground.
Yeah, you get into like the Moors, right?
Yeah. And people don't like, do you know what I mean? They just kind of take this idea that Europe was always thriving, and they don't understand that Europe is thousands of years of fighting, and empires came, went, collapsed. Some, complete indigenous types of people were completely wiped out or absorbed.
Totally. You get into this like when the colonial process is sort of towards its end, it's apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And so that's when people think of Indigenous people in North America, they're thinking of the tail end of that, where it's sort of like an apocalypse, right? We have like a 90% decrease in population. We have these nations that are banding together. So that's where like the word like band or tribe comes from, because like the survivors that made it through the genocide are kind of like grouping together. And the extraordinary thing when I started unpacking it was how they were able to still fight the American military. So we have, like I deal with the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Battle of the Rosebud, and they're disproportionately outnumbered and out technologied, right? So we're dealing with like Gatling guns and self-repeating rifles, and they got like a janky Winchester that they traded, 10 hides for. But they're still able to defeat these groups. To me, that was interesting. I was like,
it is.
Well, how about that?
It is.
We're in like the Greek like battle of like 300, and so right now I'm working on a narrative about Geronimo, and the same thing. Like he's leading 50 warriors against 3,000 military and winning. And so, these are trained soldiers. These people have gone through, the different channels, and, they understand, but yet they're still getting outpaced by these, essentially, untamable people, because they won't. So where the contention's coming from in the late 1800s with these different groups, and what I write about is that they won't go to the reservations. So it's closing in, closing in, closing in. They're like, you got to go. And they're like, no, like we're going to die before we go there, because they understand that they're giving up sovereignty.
Yeah.
And so they, it becomes like a war of attrition at this point, because the U.S. knows if they just kind of make us hopeless and beat us down, we'll just kind of like, just be like, okay, whatever, like I just like enough. And so to have that sort of inner spiritual strength to like stand up and be like, no, this isn't right. We know what you're doing, and like you're going to have to fight us for it. Like to me, that showed like a tremendous amount of agency that's sort of forgotten. It gets like kind of lost in like, we talk about like the 100 Years' War, or, where I'm sure battles like this happen, and it gets kind of put into one sentence. Like, oh yeah, like that just happened. Like no big deal. Like, and so we kind of like, I think like as a global population, like you can kind of lose like your sense of empathy to like what actually transpired.
Yeah, because those, like you say, these people banded together, and I would imagine they knew what was going to happen. Like,
oh, definitely. You can see from the different documents they knew we're probably going to die doing that.
Yeah, and that and to understand a person, who knows that this is my last stand. I'm not winning this, but I will win, because I won't submit to you. And that act of valor to be able to, because I couldn't imagine that being me. I mean, you never know what circumstances life will throw at you, but these are, and you're not talking what independent actions here. You're talking about a group groups of people who know that they're not going to win, but they're also, we are not going to live under your rule. So you are going to have to take it from us, and we know the cost to that. And that's okay, because I'm going to rest in peace, and I'm going to have my honour intact. I'm going to know that I live by my principles, by my philosophies, and that's much greater and will always have more value to me than living under your oppression. And to be able to take that stand, knowing that's just incomprehensible to me.
That's how I came up with the title, All I See is Violence. Is I thought, could you imagine the stress of that? And you kind of see it portrayed really well in the movie Gladiator, where he's death before dishonor. And you sort of, to like yourself, I was like, whoa, imagine being faced with that. How would you handle that level of tension? You wake up with it, you live with it all day, you go to sleep with it, you wake up with it. I wonder what that would do to your psyche.
Well, it reminded me, as we were just talking about the Tom Cruise film about the samurai, and I don't know if I've forgotten. I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's an older film, right?
Yeah, and the ending is where they all run into the Gatling guns and the repeating rifles with just swords and bows and arrows, as traditional samurai, and until they are all dead, pretty much. There's a few stragglers, and at the very end, Tom Cruise goes to see the Emperor, and he goes to hand him the sword of the guy that used to be his bodyguard, who stood his ground for the samurai ways, because he didn't want imperialism to take over. And he says to Tom Cruise, I want you to tell me how he died. And Tom Cruise says, no, I'll tell you how he lived. And and it's just one of the most powerful movie scenes ever, if you know what I mean, if you watch the whole film. And
no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's been a long time since I've seen that.
Yeah. And
I don't typically like Tom Cruise, but I did enjoy that film.
Yeah, I understand where you come from, because he's what I would just in the UK would call Marmite. You either love it or you hate it.
Which isn't necessarily bad, but it's a bit of a treat.
But of course, because you Chichester, so you'd understand that saying Marmite. People say it's a bit Marmite. You'll either love it or you hate it. And he can be like that. He can do some really powerful roles. But then there's that other side to him and some of the other stuff that he does. But he is that's what I mean. Those tribes, so those men, would have faced that moment, and I imagine that they would have found probably their last act of peace. Do you know what I mean? It just.
Totally. They died with a level of contentment, and where it got even more complex for me. So I didn't realize that there was also female warriors amongst the nations in North America going up against the American military. And so this was shared to me with a Cheyenne elder at a feast, and he just looked at me and he said, "Did you know that there were female warriors?" And I didn't know that. And so as a historian, I'm trained in archival research. So I started going through the archives, and, there was female warriors, and they're sort of written out of the history because at the time, the men that were recording the history didn't like that they were being bested by women. Yeah. So, so they were like, oh, no.
And it would have been, I imagine it would have also been frowned upon that they killed women.
It could be, but at that point, the women, the indigenous women that they were up against were just as skilled or more skilled than them. And so they were trained as warriors. So what happened with the warrior culture with indigenous tribes is that they're kind of picked really young. So they kind of see where people's, skill sets shine. And so you're kind of trained from a toddler onwards in whatever it is you're doing for your community. So these women weren't just some chick that picked up a spear and hopped on a horse. These were very complex, fierce beings to come up against. And so they fought a little bit differently as well to make up with discrepancies in size and strength. So they get into this guerrilla component that they'd never really encountered, and that kind of threw the military off as well. And so, like, or I'm dealing with like Lozen and the Apaches right now, and she's throwing spears that could pierce, chest cavities. Could you imagine them
Yeah.
not to have strength on horseback? Like, you're running after someone on a horse carrying a spear, and then she's hucking it into them. And how they designed their arrowheads is once it went in, you couldn't pull it out. So, you couldn't just like, if
Yeah.
you got an arrow through the arm. And then they did another thing that was quite complex is that they also dipped them in poison. So even if you kind of got nicked, like the chances that you're going to die were pretty high.
It's nasty, and this is, yeah. So moving forward, what continued? Because obviously, like you were saying, that these policies went right into the 20th century.
Well, yeah, they're still in the 21st century. Like, we're still unpacking them in North America. Like, they're not fully, like I was saying, like we have, things like land back where we're still fighting over territory and like the reservation and, autonomy and, representation through the different government channels. Like, it's not something that's just like, oh, this is complete now. Like, we're not there yet. And so even that shows a lot of strength and resilience, even doing what I'm doing and not being, defeated and sort of, neutralize, like, shows like the testament of spirit that we have, that we're still able to, it's like, no, like, I'm gonna figure this out.
Yeah.
like, like, you can take me and you can force me into like your education system, but I can still, figure it out on my own.
Because we haven't really kind of spoken about it, because I'm partly because I was still wrapping my head around it, because it did catch me out when you said about, oh no, when you were born you were taken from your mum, basically because, well, you're an Indian, so we're not having
Yeah,
that.
it's malicious intent, and it's still going on. Like, they're still forcibly taking Indigenous children from their mothers. Like,
Well, now
it's not
in
something. Yeah, right
2026.
now, like it's still happening. And even like they can prove that they were forcibly sterilizing Indigenous women up until 2015. So there's been massive litigation, and then
Fuck.
they also flooded all the nations with opiates. So the pharmaceutical companies went into both United States and Canada, and they started offering different pharmaceutical drugs that they didn't realize were opiates and highly addictive. And so they ended up winning the litigation with that. But I mean, there's been something like $1 billion paid out in litigation fees because they're constantly like
So
suing and then countersuing and
you've got dickheads in Hollywood protesting about the stupidest fucking things, and their neighbours are actually still having children removed in forceful sterilizations, and they're fucking silent.
yeah, I'm sure it's going on in the United States to a certain extent as well. So like I write an
No,
Odyssey of
but these
Silence.
people are unhappy about countries they've never visited and don't know
Yeah, and
anything
it's
about.
happening in their own backyard for sure. And it's just from like a humanity, like it's sort of like a punch to the stomach. You know what I mean? Or it's like, whoa,
I don't.
like you clearly don't give a shit
But
because it doesn't
it's.
impact you, right?
I just like I am a little bit caught off because I'm, like I say, well, because I think naivety, right, in the sense that it's the 21st century. You're Canada. You're acting like it's the 18th century. I don't obviously.
For sure,
I'm not.
it's big
Not
human
you.
rights issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for
And
sure.
and this is the same country that fucking gets involved. Sorry, I've started to swear now, right? But gets involved in other countries' politics about human rights. Fuck off. Sort your own
Yeah,
doorstep out.
they don't have a leg to stand on. It's like that's what I was saying. Like it's so clearly hypocritical that like,
Yeah.
as an Indigenous person, like, we had this big thing with Justin Trudeau and nobody really liked him, but they tried to portray him in the media like everyone liked him. So he would go and he'd visit a reservation, that's where all the Indians have been forcibly relocated to, and they just go nuts booing him.
Yeah.
They're like, like you see a politician and like right away, like the first thing is like you want to heckle them.
Because that's bizarre. Like, just.
Yeah, for like, and then there's this big show in Canada for like Black Lives Matter. right? So it's like, well, what about these other
Yeah,
lines?
yeah. This is what is blowing my mind. It is
So in these residential schools, they had higher death rates than Auschwitz.
shit.
So, like, if you start like unpacking that, so they found these mass graves all attached to these schools, right? And so there's been huge
I have heard
litigation,
about
especially in
this.
Canada. Yeah, so like the government was like, "Oh shit, the jig is up." They
Yeah.
got the evidence, and so they're trying to like quietly like acknowledge it, but like cover it all at the same time, right? Because it's too much truth.
Because this is the thing that I don't know how much you're aware about UK politics at the moment, but it is a bit of a disaster, and we're having a few issues in the country right now.
There's like flare-ups in the UK. Like every 10 years, it kind of like gets a bit janky. Like, whoa.
Currently, Keir Starmer he cancelled 8,800 or 8,000 local elections last year. He's cancelled 9,000 already for this year. About 30 people a day are going to prison for posting things on social media they don't like.
Oh wow! No, I didn't realize
No,
that.
yeah, it's has got that
You
bad.
entered 1984.
We have no, we literally have. Yeah, it's really like it's just strange. It's just like the Keir Starmer and the Labour government are. Yeah, that they're the council. They're just like they're just removing people's powers and just like basic ones. And if you do start, they've brought in a program into schools where they're teaching children about far right extremists and why that's bad and why it can get you into trouble if you start supporting far right extremists. And of course, far right extremists are just anybody that doesn't support Labour. And you are labelled far right. You know what I mean? If you don't,
Wow.
Yeah, and it's now part of the government literature on the UK website that if you are anti-immigration, you are classed as far right.
Wow.
And
So you're not allowed to have an opinion.
No. It has
That's sort of what.
yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what they did to the Indigenous people, right? Like, so if you try to keep your child from going to residential school, you were arrested and put in jail. You could serve like up to 10 years prison sentence.
Jesus.
And so in Canada, like we didn't even have the right to vote till 1960. And so you had from these atrocities, so they move everyone onto the reservation. In the United States, in about 1950, they start closing some of these reservations. So it's not just like, so you're taken from the land that you know, and these were self-sustaining communities, right? So you hunted, you gathered, you didn't need to have any reliance on a monetary system. And so you acquire things through trade. And like I was mentioning, previous to contact, these are very complex civilizations. So we're taken down to the apocalypse, and now they get them all. They're kind of weak, right? They don't have the numbers. They've been, shaken out of their big cities and their agriculture and everything, and they're kind of roaming around, but they're still like really adaptable with the technology that's given to them, and they're finding a way. So, but broken down, get put on these reservations where then you're given a government handout. And so that was like the trade-off. So you give up, you acquiesce, you give up your land, you get moved to the reservation, then you're given rations of like sugar, flour, coffee, like all the things that kind of like wear you down physically. And so they become reliant on this system. And then they start taking the children in like 1860 in both Canada and the United States and placing them in these boarding schools. And this is going on. And then in 1950, the government turns around. So now we've been on the reservation for 100 years. We've lost like a lot of these cultural components, this connection to the land. And the land's considered sacred, like Stonehenge, right?
Yep.
There's these points that are like sacred points to their cosmology. So they've lost the connection in that. The stories are dying, the ceremonies are dying. Like they're now dependent on this food that's all processed. They're losing like their plant medicine and all these, things that can kind of keep them vibrant. And so in 1950, they implement a new policy that they're going to close 70% of the reservations and move all these Indians to urban centers. So now we've been receiving a lower standard of education, right? So we don't, we're not coming in like with a
Yeah.
Ivy League, white collar job. Like we're coming in to be like the new like working class.
Yeah.
And so, like, the dysfunction that stems from that is just like it's mammoth. And so, our incarceration numbers, so our, people who are arrested and put in prison, are disproportionately high. And so, all these different tribes that normally wouldn't talk to each other start talking in prison. And they're like, whoa, like, this is unbelievable. So, every single treaty the US government made with these indigenous tribes, they broke.
Yeah.
They haven't honored a single treaty. So they start talking about these different men in incarceration, and they, you know what, we've had enough. So they come out of that and they form the American Indian movement. And this like is a huge civil rights movement where they're kind of like illuminating and all these wrongs. And so it's a real contentious point. We got the Vietnam War. We got, the American Indian movement. They're not happy. They're like, a lot of truth is going on. And it ends up with a standoff at Wounded Knee on the Sioux. So I deal with like the Battle of Little Bighorn. So that's in 1876. And then we're at like Wounded Knee, which is like 1972. And so they have a standoff with the FBI. So we've gone from like the military now to like the FBI. The FBI, like the American government, is trying to like shut down this American Indian movement, and they're partnering with civil rights. And then it just kind of gets like squashed, and everyone just like forgets about it. And so when I start like picking this up in university, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, what? Like, every single treaty, like this is crazy.
It is. Bloody hell.
And so when I did go to school in the UK, it was really nice because, like no one knew about any of it.
No, I didn't.
They're like Indigenous, and so I would say that, and everyone was like, "Oh, you mean French Canadian?" I was like, "Oh, sure, whatever, French Canadian."
Told you. That's what we know about Canada. If you don't speak English, oh, you're the French Canadian. Okay.
But to them, there was none of these, this sort of discrimination that I had faced in North America. So it opened up like a door to an opportunity that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
So it ended up being like, something beneficial.
Yeah. Because that's a strange one, because the UK, we don't really understand civil rights movements because we had ours centuries ago.
Oh, you're going to have one brewing if this timer keeps going.
Yeah. It's
all the people in prison are going to start talking.
It's getting that way. It is getting that way. And I do get fearful, because when the pendulum swings, these things they don't stop in the middle. It has to.
No.
Walls
get broken down.
Well, the way I always look at things is, and this is where it becomes hard to predict, is the pendulum still left? Because if it is, well, then the extreme right will happen. Because it's whether or not the pendulum is already swinging back. Because if it's swinging back, it's just going to probably fall. It's going to level off, kind of just right of the centre. But if it's not swinging back yet, then we're in real trouble, because the right will be just as extreme as the fascist left.
No, totally. Like when you get to those extremes, like extreme left and extreme right are essentially the same thing.
They are. They don't even realise. They're just
like. No, they actually are what they hate.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're like, wow, you actually are that.
Yeah.
So like, I tried to come from like a point of neutrality with everything. Or like when I'm dealing with this history and I'm dealing with these atrocities, like I try to come from a place of like loving compassion. It's like, where can we look at the humanity? Where can we like integrate this? Like, because like, going like, now we need everything given back to us. It's like, well, that's not correct either. Like we need to come from like a middle ground, because you essentially become, that same group that did those things.
I think it's difficult when you can't explain, like you can't explain to me about the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, because it's always been like that in my time. and I have family members from all sides. So I don't know the answer. What I know is in 1974, I was born to Maura and Martin Watson. And it turns out that the family politics is quite complex. And I was born into that, and I don't have a solution. And at no point do I feel like I'm responsible for it either. Because I live in England. I've never lived in Ireland. I've never lived in an island that was united. Nobody that I'm aware of has ever known a united Ireland, because it was King Henry VIII split it, took over it, and they started fighting forever. And there is no way, whatever you do displaces somebody who was born into a situation that they had no control over. And I think one of the things that trips people up is we're looking for the right answer, and there isn't a right answer. There's, what are we going to do tomorrow?
I agree with that. There isn't. Like it's just like learning, and as you kind of like what I found, like as I expanded my awareness, so I became more knowledgeable, and I became more connected, and just with my own Indigenous culture, and like just small things in your daily life have big impacts. So people get overwhelmed, but you just do like small things, like, and it does make a difference, whether it's walking your dog and saying hello, or like it doesn't, like, people are like, oh my God, like it needs to change. It's like, well, no, like you can't change other people. Like we can't change what's been done. Like what's happened.
Yeah, but that's it. It's very difficult, isn't it? Because you cannot undo it. You can't rewrite it. You can't undo it. So for me, it's always, well, what can we do tomorrow?
Totally. Like, and for me, that's just like being present and being open to, talking about it and discussing it, and kind of like your grandparents, like moving on, because I have to brush my teeth with, like, I was forcibly taken away. Oh, my mom, she was abused, like taken away too. Like, now they're all dead. Like at some point we have to, like, and I think like by sharing the history and connecting with, like, people that aren't necessarily Indigenous, like I think at this point it's all our history, and that's like the greatest thing you can do, is just being open to learning it and be like, oh wow, okay, I didn't think of it that way. And you don't have to carry it with you. You can let it go, but it will impact your actions in a beneficial way.
One of the things I actually envy the North American continent to is their history is tangible. Your history is real. My history is, nobody in the entire United Kingdom can trace their DNA back to Stonehenge. Do you know what I mean?
Wow, right? Because of all the Romans when they came in like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I've done my DNA test. My DNA test comes up as I'm British and Irish. But when did those? Because the Ice Age blocked the entire country off. So at what point did we march across Europe? But what I mean is, there is nobody alive today that can tell you of their experience of that history happening. Even if I go to Salisbury, Chichester has a cathedral, doesn't it? Had a cathedral.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's this big claim.
Yeah, no one built it. No one alive today knows anybody that built that cathedral, because it's hundreds of years old. And that's that's the whole of Europe. Everything was built centuries ago, and we live in the shadows of our history. I have spoons in my kitchen that's older than parts of the United States of America, and that's nothing to somebody in Great Britain. Everything is bloody old, right? You guys, your history is still happening. It's still connected to you. Do you know what I mean?
No, totally. And that's from the agency of my ancestors, right? My Indigenous ancestors. But that's what I mean. They death gripped it.
Yeah, but there are people alive today that knew the people that this happened to. You are still a living part of that history, because it happened to you. It's those atrocities are still present today, because you are still alive, you are still breathing, and it happened to you, and it happened to your mum, it happened to your parents, your grandparents, and there are connections to what I call and that's the reason I say it's tangible, because it's still within your reach. Whereas there isn't a stonemason alive today that knows anything about the guy that built Stonehenge, Salisbury Cathedral, or even the bloody wall, the bridge that's 300 years old that goes across the River Avon in Amesbury. No, whereas you're writing about the history you're living in, and that your parents lived in, your grandparents in, and and people should embrace that, because you can't, like we said, you can't undo it. So understand it, learn about it. Like, why are we still doing this?
No, I agree with that, like, totally. And so, like, it's like, I don't believe, like, there's been a few people that have commented that I'm a revisionist historian. I'm not at all. Like, I'm in full, like, acceptance of what happened. I'm not trying to change that. It's like, well, no, that happened, but let's look at, the different components of that. Because it's not just, it's very gray. Like I said, it's not black and white. Like, it's very nuanced. Like, there's these subtle, currents in there that kind of like shift your whole paradigm. Even like, so I write about General George Custer, who actually wasn't a general. He was a lieutenant colonel, but he self-professed himself a general because he's very vain. And so everyone, like, we all know him as general.
Yeah.
Like, that's extraordinary. He's like the original narcissist. And he had like a profound love of the indigenous people, but he had no problem slaughtering them. And so, he would get out into the field when he got sent to the plains, and he dressed in kind of like Indian apparel. He put on like hide leggings with fringe and like a hide tunic with fringe, and very, very like cringe and like, whoa. And he had like an Indian lover, which I'm not too sure if it was a lover. It could have been rape, but that's I can't really prove that, so I'll just kind of hope it was consensual.
We'll agree it was consensual in that he permitted it.
Yeah. And so he had a couple children with this women, but he never like claimed them as his own, and he knew like the indigenous people were high intelligence, and he like marveled in his own writings, his own journal entries, how they could kind of like outfox them, and he was very impressed by them. But he thought he could destroy them. So when he goes into the Battle of Little Bighorn, like, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy. Like, it's unbelievable what transpires. And so I didn't know that history. So when I started unpacking it for the first time was that when I began archival research for this novel. And I was just like, whoa, like, you couldn't make that up. Like, so history can be like so incredibly fantastic.
Yeah. And it's yeah, I mean, how did you even start writing the book with all of that?
Well, it started with like, so I'm Indigenous, and I have a strong connection to my Indigenous roots. And so I talk with a lot of elders. And I actually, for my time in England, I found this with like Indigenous English elders too. Like, you get into like these fantastic stories like really quickly.
Yeah.
And what I also found interesting is a lot of the stories, like the Celtic stories, are very similar to the North American mythology. And so like I found that interesting too. I'm like, oh, that's strange. I think I've heard this before. And even if you get into like some of the Celtic words are very similar to like the Eastern nations. Like there's some crossover like linguistically. And so I thought that was strange as well. But besides that, so I started getting these oral stories, and they started pertaining to the Plains Indians. And so I kind of start like pulling that together, and then I do archival research. So I start going through like the military documents and different historical, documentation and ethnographic photographs. And it just like this whole kind of picture emerged where I was like, wow, like I really need to tell this component of it, because it's never really been like re-examined. Because again, like we get into like one sentence like summarizing history, like 100 Years War, World War II, or we get into like Holocaust,
with no empathy,
so, like,
no understanding, no insight.
Totally. And like I think like a lot of that causes this disassociation and kind of breaks down a sense of humanity. And so you kind of proceed differently when you have your humanity intact.
Yes.
That's just what I found as a human.
But I mean, it's true. It pops into my head. I never remember the name of the film. not the proper name, but it was something like the Potato Literary Pie Association or something, and it was a film.
I know what you're talking about, at that island.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I watched that film and was blown away because it's a simple story of a German falling in love with a girl of an island they invaded in Jersey or Guernsey, and there was a child left over, and the mother was killed by the Germans, and the German father had to go back to Germany, and there was this, like, of course, then for the first time ever in my life when I watched that film, I was like, that probably happened. There would have been people that just realised we're not enemies, and they would have fallen in love, and there would have been children left over. And there's a complexity to that because on both sides have been taught to hate each other.
Oh, totally. And so you have like where, like I was saying, there's interracial marriage going on.
Yeah.
And so like in the plains, so when they're negotiating the treaties for the Sioux that I write about for the Black Hills, they like in the American documents, it specifically says like no squamming. And so what that means is that none of the white men that were married to the indigenous Sioux women were allowed in the negotiations because they knew what the government was trying to do. And so they were pushing back in these treaties. They were like, no, that's not fair. And so they, that's not something we learn about.
Yeah.
So they would have had mixed race children. And so when I was going through, I was looking through for a photograph of Crazy Horse, and I couldn't find a single one. But for different descriptions of him, it would appear that he had blonde hair and blue eyes. So we start kind of like unpacking these different things. And so what happens is indigenous cultures are matrilineal. So if you married an indigenous woman, you would go live with her community and you were then considered indigenous. But the government knew like that they clearly weren't indigenous, that they were, a white ancestry, and they were banning them from, having any sort of agency for the nation that they had been adopted into.
Crazy. It's just, I'm still struggling to get my head around that this has happened right into the 21st century. and also because it's Canada. It's just like, Canada was kind of...
You'll never think of Canada the same again.
Yeah, well, Trudeau did that for you anyway, so it's,
He ruined it for everybody.
But because there was always that stereotype that Canada was kind of superior to the United States of America, kind of its moral high ground.
No, we're on the same level.
Well, I wasn't going to tarnish that brush, but now you brought it up. Yeah, it's baffling. Sorry, I'm mindful of time. Where can people find you?
They can find me I have a website, and I'm newish to Instagram, but I always reply back on there. And then you can find my novel in the UK, I think, on Amazon. Okay. I know people have mixed feelings about Amazon, so there might be, what is it, like Waterstones?
Yeah, I don't think anybody that has a life is really that bothered about Amazon. Do you know what I mean?
I personally like Amazon, but I realize like the pushback against it.
I'm the same, but I use Amazon. I have my own products on Amazon. I'm not, and also like maybe like in the UK, maybe our government should just sort out the tax laws so that companies like Amazon can't avoid them.
Oh, that would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. So do you have a website?
I do. It's Angie Elita Newell.
I will make sure that's in the description. And just lastly, and it's my random question, which would be definitely interesting. If I want you to imagine you have a time machine, right? The time machine can be any car of your choice. What would the car be? Where would you go? And what would be playing on the radio?
Well, I'm hopping in a DeLorean.
Nice.
Back to the Future. And I'm going to go back to see who the heck built that cathedral in Chichester.
Yeah. And what
we will get to the bottom of that, because apparently there's like a Roman mosaic in the bottom, and it was a bathhouse, and there's all these different stories. But I want to meet the indigenous Celtic people.
Yeah, but that's a good point, because people don't understand that everybody just built on top of everybody else's temples.
Yeah. So when you start like peeling back, so if you can go to Chichester, it's amazing because they kind of started like archaeologically digging up the basement there.
Yeah.
And they found like all sorts of treasures.
And you're like, oh, look, there was somebody here before Christianity. Oh, who knew?
Oh, just random.
Yeah. And what would be playing? What music would be playing?
No, Led Zeppelin.
Nice. Angie, I have really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And that was Angie, one of the most insightful, cheerful people I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. And the actual compassion she has for history and understanding that it can't be changed, and it's about what we do tomorrow and how we handle it tomorrow. And just, I completely, even now as I'm kind of doing the outro, the finish, I was blown away by what happened in Canada. I did not know any of this, and my hearts go out to anybody and everybody that's been affected by it. So please do go to the website, check out the book, look Angie up. And as always, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.